Welcome to the Bike Talk with Dave podcast. I'm your host, Dave Mabel, and I appreciate you tuning in today. This week we've got more of a topic of discussion than a special guest, but I do have special guests, which I will tell you about in a minute. But the topic of discussion, as you can see from the title, post-race blues or re-entry. Re-entry might be a better description of it, but it all came about because Alexandra Houchin, who just broke her single-speed record at the Tour Divide this summer, in an Instagram post, she opened up about her feelings after the midsummer race. I'm going to paraphrase a bit, and kind of cut and paste and put this together, but she wrote, "I feel so lonely despite being surrounded by love. I feel like no one understands what I just went through and overcame. The post-race come down hits me hardest after Tour Divide. I'm having a hard time. I'd spent the last 2 months touring and racing, and now it's back to hustling to make some money and dealing with responsibilities. Post-race blues affects lots of racers. You're not alone. Re-entry is hard after a 2,700-mile effort." Now, I've never done a 2,700-mile effort, and even if you haven't done a 2,700-mile effort, or ridden across Alaska, or hiked the Appalachian Trail, or whatever for many, many days, it's not uncommon to have feelings of loss after any big event you've worked hard for, even if it's your first 5K, or your first 100K gravel ride, or your first bikepacking trip to the state park 63 miles away. It's super normal to be overcome with emotion after a big effort and catch a case of the post-race blues. After Alex's post, I reached out to a guy by the name of Joe Stiller, who runs a company called Bar Yak. They make bikepacking accessories for, pretty much everything bikepacking. It's been around since 2012 and he now sells worldwide. Bar Yak is infamous. And Joe, holy cow, adventure racing, bikepacking, they have been lifelong passions for he and his wife Tina. They've raced together, they've created bikepacking events like the Trans South Dakota, they've hosted bikepacking clinics, and they've guided tours throughout the Midwest. He's done epic shit. He's bikepacked through Vietnam, done the Iditarod Trail, the Colorado Trail, even the Tour Divide. I feel like his life inspired this classic by Johnny Cash. I've traveled everywhere in this here land. I don't need to go on and destroy your ears with my singing, but I think you get the idea. Joe is one of the OGs of bikepacking, and he seems happy to share his knowledge garnered from years on the bike and help the rest of us who are just getting into bikepacking maybe not make the mistakes that he's learned so many times over. So one of the things that he recently shared with me is the fact that, yes, it is hard to come home from a big trip. Like, very hard. In fact, transitioning from life on the road to back to civilization with all of its distractions and responsibilities can be so hard that it can actually lead to feelings of loss and depression. Well, I thought about this for a minute and I thought it needs to be addressed somehow. So I reached out to a friend of mine, Rachel Moe, who's a licensed mental health counselor. She's now at Thrive Psychological and Consulting Services in Wisconsin, but she was living here in Des Moines at the time. So I reached out to see if she would be willing to hop on a call with myself and Joe to talk about just that. What is that kind of post-race blues? What is that re-entry like from a huge event, from a multi-day event, from life on the trail? And how can you get through it? What is it? What do we call it? And how do we get through it? And then, since most of us really haven't done a 2,700-mile race, what can we do to support those who do? So I tried to get Joe, Rachel, and myself on a call to discuss just that. We had some technical challenges And our three-way call was kind of a weird two-way thing. Rachel could hear me, Joe could hear Rachel, Rachel could hear Joe, but Joe couldn't hear Dave, and Dave could hear Joe. It was weird, but anyway. So I have sliced it together, and we are going to have a little discussion about re-entry and post-race blues with Rachel Moe and Joe Stiller. So we're going to begin with a conversation between Rachel and Joe. She's kind of introducing herself to Joe since I wasn't able to, since he couldn't hear me. And then talking about the topic of re-entry and what it's like and where it comes from, and quite frankly, how devastating it can be to some people.
Yeah, so I'm a mental health counselor practicing in Iowa, and so we're talking about reentry and kind of the different ways that impacts athletes having come home from a big event. And I know you probably have personal experiences with it, and I think everybody does to some extent, of having trained and put in a lot of time and effort for this one thing, and then it's just done, and there's kind of a void and an emptiness that can sometimes lead to clinical things like mental health or depression, anxiety, and stuff like that.
So that's something that's I've struggled with, and I've had friends struggle with. I truly think that's what was responsible for taking the life of one of my close friends a couple years ago in August. And the confusion is the reassimilation. I almost feel like I could feel myself coming back into society where everything is normal. And one of the things, and maybe you can address this, is it's almost painful to see myself reassimilate into society, being the person who's in a rush to go to the grocery store, get the mail, and making things important that were never important to me out on the trail. And when I feel myself slipping back into the real world, normal world, whatever you want to tag it, I feel like that piece that I found out about myself is dying. And I think that's one of the things that hurts or I struggled with the most. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, so like when you say there's that piece that you found out about yourself was dying, can you elaborate a little bit more of what that piece was, or kind of what you mean by that?
When you're out bikepacking, you become immersed with nature, and all your senses kind of change format. Your awareness of everything around you. So this was something that, and I think that this is pretty common with everything in its environment, and I'm going to pick these words. So when I was in Vietnam, bikepacking in Vietnam and Laos on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, this is one thing that really confused me and I thought was really interesting. Every time we came into a community, there were three of us. No matter if it was pitch dark, everyone in that community was aware that we did not belong, which always puzzled me, because it's total pitch darkness. They maybe hear our freewheel, they maybe see our light, but whatever was the occasion, or I don't even know what the proper words would be, but we were something different in their environment, and they were extremely aware of it. Am I making a little bit of sense now? When you're doing a big bikepacking trip or anything where you're extremely remote, I think that you start to become one with nature, and
Sure.
your senses your body is always changing to the environment it's in. So your body is changing to suit that environment. And when you do a large bikepacking event and you kind of throw yourself back into society, I mean, a lot of people who are doing the Tour Divide right now have to be going through that same thing. They get thrown back into society, and then everything that was their norm is no longer their norm. And that sense of peace that maybe they had riding when they were in nature with one, even though in an event like that, you come into environments, you come into cities, you meet people on the road, you have these brief relationships. They're, like I said, they're brief, they're not an emotional ownership. I mean, you don't own that relationship. It's just a brief experience on your trip, and then you're back into what you were doing. And I think that, like your body, like when you train, your body becomes more physically fit the more you stress parts of your body, your muscle tissues grow, and your body is constantly changing to suit those needs. I think that contributes to those experiences when you're on a bikepacking trip. And the longer you're on this bikepacking trip, the more you become one with that. Basically fine-tune your body for that environment. And so by finishing up an event like the Tour Divide, the Arizona Trail Race, the Colorado Trail is coming up for many riders, that I think that's a shock to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, for everybody that engages in some kind of, exercise or physical activity, whether, it's just an hour a day or a huge bikepacking trip, it's often used as a way to kind of to debrief and kind of release the stressors from their day-to-day life and block out, the problems that are to come later on. And so I can imagine after, going on a trip that's multiple days long and having gone that long away from society, and then having to come back and deal with kind of normal stressors and things like that. I mean, it's a huge loss for these athletes, and something that they're grieving, because it was, a piece of their life that was very important to them, and a distraction from all the other stressors and things going on. And so, and then, it's over, and they have to go back to their day-to-day life. And I don't think that there is enough awareness or education of how to appropriately grieve and kind of cope with that.
I believe it almost feels like a piece of me is dying. I'm losing something that I found out something about myself that I really enjoyed. And each time I would go do an event, and I'm sure this is similar with other people, when you came back off of it, you remember those feelings, and you know that you're going to go through this detox from the environment you were just in. And this was a relationship that you built, even though it was primarily you with yourself and your environment. And now that's you watch it slowly decay is probably the best way. And that was, to me, that was always the most painful thing, because I knew that I was reassimilating into society. And I always use this as a metaphor, and I don't mean it that this happened to me, but this is probably a good description of the metaphor. Is you fall into society where somebody flips you off because you didn't respond the way they did, and all these negative feelings, and you're kind of thrown back into that everyday environment where people tend to be insensitive to others around them, and you've just been immersed in an environment that you're shaping as you go, and you're becoming one with it.
Yeah, and I like how you describe it as kind of like a relationship, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because I know it's like, to a lot of people it's kind of interesting that they would describe a sport or an activity that way. But I think you're absolutely right. And what I know about humans is that we're wired for connection, and sometimes people connect with their sports and the activities that they're doing, sometimes with other people that are doing it with them, and sometimes they reap kind of those benefits just kind of being one with nature out there on their own. But then when that is taken away, they've got to find a new way to connect and engage with society. And it turns out a lot of people are assholes and flipping them off, and they can't just, get out and go on their 90-day cruiser again. And so I mean, again, it leaves this huge void of like, how am I gonna feel fulfilled and connect and re-engage with society when I am coming off of this, event that worked so well and left me feeling so full and so satisfied.
Have you
It's a
had
huge
experiences
loss.
like that before? Have you done long events that?
So the longest I've done is a few hours. So no, nothing, nothing compared to what you've experienced. But I know, so I'm a runner as well as a cyclist, a newer cyclist than I am a runner, and I know, from marathon training, it takes up so much of my time as far as like, okay, I'm going to be more mindful of what I'm eating and of my workouts and things like this. So it's like a 12-week block where it feels like so much of my mental energy and so much of the space of my life is dedicated to this event. And every time, the race is over, you feel the loss of it and the void, because it's like, okay, now what am I going to do with my time? And okay, now I actually should probably hang out with my friends that I've been ignoring, because I got to get up early on Saturday mornings to run. And how come my friends have all these inside jokes that I don't have, but I can't go out and do another marathon tomorrow because my body's fatigued. And I mean, it's a whole battle and thing to.
So Rachel, with you saying that, when you reassimilate back into society after a rigorous training training program for your A event, this could get you in trouble. Would you rather have that relationship, or does that relationship mean more to you than your friends?
Yeah, see, and that's you're right. It could get me in trouble. And there's part of me, here having the education and the experience with people
Yeah.
that I have, that I know, like nothing beats true and genuine connections with other people, where you can be, vulnerable and transparent in your true self and cry with them and laugh with them and things like that. But running or biking for hours on end is a whole lot easier, and
Yeah.
oftentimes feels just as good. And so I've found, I guess, for myself, and I think with a lot of other athletes that I've seen and people that I've worked with, that we're gonna go to what's easy and quick. And like athletes are a breed of people that we find a lot of condolence and peace in our sport and what we do. And so,
Is there some advice? I mean, how can someone cope with reassimilation when they're done with training or putting so much of themselves out for an event, because look, Tour Divide is a great example because it's happening right now. We have riders been finishing the last week or two, and they're going through these experiences right now, whether they realize it or not. Someone may feel an emptiness inside, and so that's the first time I had this experience. I didn't know why I was feeling this way, and
sure.
so what kind of advice can you give to people that are just finishing up the Tour Divide and have the rest of their summer scheduled with big events like this, that may not know what these feelings are that are ripping away at them?
Yeah, so I think the first step is to kind of acknowledge, what's happening and what you're experiencing. So often, we feel things without knowing what they are, where they're coming from. And so, for the Tour de Ide, it's a huge loss. And so kind of acknowledging that you're going, like you're grieving, you're experiencing a loss of something that was important to you and something that gave you a lot of meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life. And then to kind of go through the steps of grieving that. And I think that looks different for every person. A lot of times I think it's having people to be able to kind of talk to and process through those things with, whether it's, people within your circle of athletes or, a close friend or a spouse. I do think that it can get incredibly lonely for athletes because not everybody gets it or knows,
People in your
what they're.
circle, unless they've done what you've done, there's almost like a brethren. I was in the military, and so
Yeah.
I can meet a 70-year-old guy or a 60-year-old guy, someone who's in Vietnam, and we can, even though I was not there at that timeline, we share a brotherhood, an experience, and I think people are doing bike packing events, big ones, especially the Tour Divide is an easy one to pick on because it's the A race for so many people who are bike packing. People will spend a year, sometimes longer, training for that event, and whether they finish or not, they're still gonna go through this process. But the hard thing is like you said, the who can you share these experiences with, and it's usually, only someone who has completed or someone who has gone through this experience themselves. So there's like a brotherhood in all these events, a little niche.
Right. And I think, the catch 22 of it all too is I know that athletes are, and this isn't necessarily all encompassing of all athletes or all people that are participating in these events, but oftentimes they're a breed of people that don't want to be transparent about their vulnerabilities or the things that they're suffering. We're kind of wired in a way of let's show people how tough we are. And so I don't know, how often these kind of conversations are happening within circles of athletes, and how often are people, going home after these long events and suffering and grieving and not aware that, the other people they were participating with are going through the same things. And so I wonder, how valuable it would be to raise more awareness within the events or the groups of athletes themselves to have these conversations and to be just as concerned with, someone's mental health after finishing a big event as they are with their physical health. And
You're spot on. I mean, this is crazy because if you go to the bikepacking websites that have, like the Tour Divide has theirs, AZT has theirs, everybody has these particular websites where inquiring minds want to know, and they're looking to see what other people are doing. What are you doing for a sleeping bag? What are you doing for a bike? What size tires? And nobody is having this conversation. So it's funny that I brought it up to Dave because June was Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I thought, this is a subject that would be probably hit home to a lot of people, whether they're male or not. It doesn't matter. I think we all have similar experiences. But then he told me that he had talked with you, and you had mentioned that, and we've never met before, and you were also making note that, this is a subject that nobody ever talks about. Everyone wants to know your tire size, what kind of tool you carry on your bicycle, what sleeping bag, but, how do you cope with after the event, after everything is said and done? And Alexandria, Dave told me that Alexandria just made a comment on her Instagram post or something like that. So it is a real problem that I think that people are, maybe glossing over or overlooking.
In this conversation between Rachel and Joe, you can see that they're talking about a thing called grief. And it's one thing to keep grief to yourself, and it's another to, admit grief and accept help from others, and for others to recognize that grief and to address it. And so I had to ask Rachel, what do we do as the friends to support their grief? And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's grief. You're grieving. It's a sense of loss. And how do we deal with the sense of loss? But I'm also wondering, just like you said, when you get done with the marathon, you're excited about it and you want to talk to everybody about it, and they don't get it because they didn't do it. Yet .00001% of the world does the Tour Divide. So nobody's going to understand what the heck you're talking about. What do you
Yeah.
think we can do as dot watchers, as friends, as family, as fans to support those who come home from the marathon, come home from Ragbri, come home from Tour Divide, and have that kind of grief? What do we do as supporters of those who are grieving?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it kind of comes from understanding that the event is more than just the event for them. It's more than just like, oh, I want to, put I want to show how good of shape I'm in, or I want to improve my fitness. Like, I think there comes a point, like I tell people all the time, like running's not good for you. I don't do it because it's good for me. I mean, it's good, maybe up to 5 miles, it's fine, but after that, you're just killing your knees. So like, it's not about health anymore. And I think a lot of people kind of, they overlook that, or it's just not as obvious. And so I think it's kind of understanding that, like, to these people, this event, it means a lot. It's the equivalent of losing a relationship, or losing a substantial part of their life. It's something that provided a lot of meaning and fulfillment. And so in being willing to listen and to have those conversations, with them, and creating more of a space where people can be kind of transparent about their experiences, and you feel safe enough to be vulnerable about what they're feeling post race, and kind of what they're experiencing, and kind of, I mean, I think it just comes down to raising an understanding of how much of a void is left upon completing these big events and things like that. And then just also kind of realizing and recognizing that these people finishing these events, they're going to have to find a way to fill that void, or to get that fulfillment and connection through some other means. And so oftentimes they'll go and sign up for another event, and that'll hold them off for a while longer. But also realizing that they're probably hungry and desperate for connection with other people, and providing that to them.
I thought, didn't you use the word grieving?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a very good descriptive term, because that's almost what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. And I think like allowing yourself the space, and other people allowing the individual the space to kind of to grieve that loss, and understanding how huge it is to that person. I mean, it's like, it's the equivalent of losing a job, or some other impactful part of their life. And I think it's hard for people to sometimes understand that it's not easily replaced either. Not easy to just go right back into everyday life. I've heard of a few scenarios of former or athletes who were formerly addicted to drugs, and it's the sport in a lot of ways replaces their drug, which to me is very telling of how it's extremely difficult for somebody to overcome an addiction. So the fact that this sport or event has been powerful enough to help them replace their addiction just tells how huge it is to them, and how hard it would be then to find something else powerful enough to replace the sport or the event.
Rachel, do you think there are things that athletes can do as they prepare for an event, as they're in an event, to be ready for that grief?
I think to kind of be aware and know that it's coming is one thing. And I think another thing is to kind of think about ahead of time. Like, I have this event, and it's a huge part of my life, and I know when it's not gonna be there, it's gonna be a huge loss. So what am I gonna do to make sure I kind of have a backbone when not backbone, but what am I gonna do to make sure I have support once I finish the event? And oftentimes I think that these events that athletes are training for, seclude them from other people. They're on a rigorous training schedule, and 0.0001% of the world is doing it, and I think we can get so caught up in our sport and what we're doing that we forget how lonely and disconnected we are from other people. And so I would say making sure to prioritize some relationships that are important to you, even in the midst of training, whatever that may look like, whether it's making sure to hang out with a friend, even if it's once a week or once a month, but just knowing that when it ends, it's going to hit hard and you're going to need those kinds of relationships and supports. Because I wonder, how much of the grief is associated with loneliness of not having people there to share their experiences with.
Well, I thought that was a very good descriptive term, grieving, and that loss. And with grieving process, it disappears with time. I liked what Rachel said is, so you set up yourself for the next latest greatest, and have those, I call them positive distractions, and I use the term positive distractions all the time. So we bike pack quite a bit. We used to be gone most of every month year round. And we recently got into a car accident heading for Mexico, and so that's changed some things probably long term for us. But with that said, so we've had that escape to look forward to. It's not as prevalent anymore. So we're always we always look for something we can do, but we're physically limited compared to what we used to do. And that's all I'll say about that. But
Have you found a way to replace the void, or to, like, what have you been doing to?
so what we used to do is we always planned the next thing. So it was never about this is what we got to do. In fact, we call our home the base camp. And if you've ever been to our home, we have pack rafts, we have sleeping bags and tents for any season of the year, snowshoes, canoes, everything. So, and a huge bike rack downstairs. So that was always our focus. And so whenever the way we would get through it is every time we were done with an event, bike packing or whatever, it would just be like, okay, in 2 weeks, we're going to do this. And so those were the positive distractions I would use. And me and Tina have been guides over the years, guiding groups of 10, 12 on pack rafting, bike rafting, trips, and stuff like that. And so I like to use that term also with them is positive distractions. And so maybe that's a way to get through experiences like this is look for positive distractions. Where at one time it was like in 2 weeks we're going to do this other trip, and so it made the transition from reassimilating, not having to give that up, because we're going to get to escape again, and we like to use that word in 2 weeks. And so positive distractions, when we are guiding people, we always make the segments or the trying segments in front of them smaller segments. Whether it be 714 miles is the total journey, I like to have this saying is 5 miles at a time. And 5 miles at a time is a metaphor. And I think to re-assimilate, you can also use that same idea and concept to just look for a positive distraction for now, whether it be a relationship with your kids when you get done with a thing like that, a bikepacking event, or some sort of a life journey, or when you're actually out on the ride. And so that's a common thing I tell our customers and our friends that are doing events like the Tour Divide, is we always remind them life 5 miles at a time. And
Yeah.
what do you think about taking away that reassimilation 5 miles at a time?
Yeah, no, I think that's good, and that's right on of, kind of finding I mean, we all need ways to cope and to deal with the world, and if we don't find a healthy outlet for it, we're going to find an unhealthy outlet for it, such as, addictions or something like that. I think, another question for, you or anyone else completing these events to kind of ask themselves is like, what is it that we are escaping from, or what is it about, our life at home that we're avoiding and, wanting, and that's not something that I would, expect you to answer here on this platform. But if you were a client of mine, I'd be going, I'd be trying to get deep in there. Because I think to some extent, these events, they're very powerful, and they can add a lot of fulfillment and meaning, but in a lot of ways they kind of act as band-aids to what's actually going on inside of us, and to what we actually need to deal with. And so just important for people to kind of to think about and to consider as well.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. It's a way to escape from things that we're running from, whether it be everyday obligations or,
Yeah.
maybe, well, me being a small single operated businessman, we are a small bike company that builds bike packing equipment, and we sell worldwide. And so when I want to go to bed at night, it is morning in Australia, and 29% of our business is in Australia. So probably for me is looking for some relief,
It's
going on these bike
exhausting.
packing
Yeah.
trips, and I
Yeah.
love those interactions with my customers. And I'm a guy. There's two kinds of people in the world. There's givers and takers, and I'm a giver. And I'm always looking for a fire to put out. And so when someone has a problem for me, I'm all on it. And if I don't have a fire to put out, I'll put theirs out. Um, so I don't know if that makes sense. Yes. And so that constant stimulation of looking for a problem to solve is my nemesis. And so bike packing is a great way to get away from that and not feel guilty that I'm not helping somebody. So,
Yep, I think all of the above. I think it depends very much on the person and what they need to feel regulated and okay in the world. 'Cause, there's some people that finishing a marathon, is their life goal, and they cross the finish line. They're one and done. They're gonna, go home to their kids and their spouse, and they've got a vacation next week. They have a lot of other a lot of other positive distractions, or a lot of other sources of fulfillment. But I think, then there's, other people where their sport or their thing has become in a lot of ways, all of them, and their only way of regulating and coping with the world. And so they finish RAGBRAI, and then they
positive
have to
distractions.
have a 100-mile race planned next week, and then and making sure they've got different buffers, or different outlets. So yeah, I think it's very kind of individual, and a mixture of
Consuming.
genetics and environment of how certain people are okay with with one way, and others a different way.
I would like to say that I'm really glad that Dave took the bull by the horns and made this a subject. So, and brought you in on it, a professional. So this is, I
Yes.
think, a subject that needs to be talked about more.
No, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. And there's a huge stigma with mental health in general, and I think especially mental health in athletes is even more of a stigma. I did a quick Google search when I was prepping for this, and athletes on college campuses seek mental health help, or professional mental health help, at a substantially lower rate than the average college student. And so I think that speaks volumes to how much awareness there needs to be about mental health, specifically in these kinds of communities.
So what you're saying is we are strong, stoic, don't need help as athletes, right?
No. I think we're strong, stoic, and we'll run ourselves to the ground before we admit that we need help. Because I mean, there's been enough now. In the news, I heard of a few Olympians dropping out because their mental health got so bad, and like we'll just keep going and going and going until we absolutely break, and I think, Joe, your friend that you talked about who lost her life to it is, case in point and good example. She kept going and going and going, or
Yeah, it was Johan.
Johan. Yep, kept going and going and going until it.
So I'm not sure if you know who Johan is. He was more known as the Bike Wanderer. This August, it will be 2 years. Um, uh, so during COVID, Johan was made it all the way down to the end of South America. So can you imagine the subject that we're talking about and the person that we're talking about, particularly, did this was 6 years of his life. And very few times he would take time off the bike and go earn some money. He went up to Canada a couple times and planted some trees to help fund his trip until his Patreon got a little stronger. But he was inspiration for so many people to get into bike packing. Well, during COVID, um, he was forced to go through the same thing that we all went through, except for he was ripped out of that environment. He made the decision because of how things were down in Patagonia. He needed to go back to Canada. And so I'm not going to get into his family relationships and stuff like that. And I'm be careful about what I say because I love him very much, and I don't want anybody to take things and go in a different direction. He was struggling. It's well talked about that he was struggling with sleep apnea, but I also know that he was also struggling with reassimilating back into society. Someone who had spent 6 years on the road, surrounded by the things he loved the most, um, and uh, and he was someone who never asked for help. He was always there to, and if you ever watched his videos and stuff, everyone got a good sense of who he was. Such a kind, loving soul that he was never one to ask for help. And in fact, whenever I would offer help, like, hey, your drivetrain is shot onto your bike. Let me send you some new drivetrain. Give me an address, and I'll send it to him. And he'd say, "Oh no, Joe, it's just that my bike is old." And I said, "Well, we can fix that." But he never wanted it to impose on anybody. So anyway, it's a very sad. I don't remember my mother's address, but I remember my last conversation with him very vividly, and he will be missed for many, many years to come. So, and there's what I feel is an extreme example of what reassimilation into society can have on somebody.
I think that proves the point too that it's okay to ask for help. And if, like I said about athletes, we're strong, we don't need help. But like, yeah, we do. Like, we're human and it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who wouldn't even ask for help for his broken or worn out bike. And of course, he's not going to ask for help when he's struggling with the grief of losing access to his trip around the world. Um, it's definitely an extreme case, but a poignant case for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I think, the fact that we're willing to put our bodies through this, crazy shit that's gonna come back and bite us one day, it says that we got stuff going on.
Yeah, for
A
sure.
little broken.
Well said.
Yep.
And that's okay.
Yep. Rachel, thanks tons for coming on and helping us talk about the kind of the grief we feel at the end of an event, whether it's, I would say, re-entry from life on the trail or even just event letdown, whether it's after doing a 5K that you came off the couch for and you were able to run your first 5K or a marathon or a long bike ride. I remember crying after my first Schwamigan mountain bike race. It was a 40-mile mountain bike race, and I literally got to the finish line and started crying. And so I call that event letdown, which I think is different than reentry. But either way, I feel like there's a sense of loss, a sense of grief, and it's those steps of the grieving process, acceptance, and being open about it that can help us get through that.
Joe, any final words or anything else you feel like we should discuss that we haven't?
No, there again, I'm just going to reiterate how I think this is a valuable topic, and I hope it runs through the cycling and athletic circles, creating some awareness for something that I truly think needs to be talked about and thought about.
Well, not only do I need to thank Rachel, I need to thank Joe Stiller for coming on and putting up with these technical challenges. Again, he could hear Rachel, he couldn't hear me. I could hear Rachel and Joe, and Rachel could hear Joe and I. But so it was kind of a weird conversation. But nonetheless, I hope we brought light and kind of opened up this topic of conversation of re-entry from huge events to just kind of post-race blues and the letdown that is normal from that. So remember that grief is real. It's okay to feel grief after an event. That's an actual legit feeling. Like, don't feel weird because you feel grief. And remember that there's stuff you can do to deal with grief. It won't feel like this forever. You can handle it. Sometimes you feel like you can't, but I know you can. You know you can. Be gentle with yourself. Be accepting with yourself. Think in cycles, not lines. There's ups, there's downs, there's flow in life. Your feelings are so normal. Like everybody, I'm telling you, at the end of Leadville 100, everybody has a sense of loss. Everybody's big event is now behind them, and they have to move on ahead and back into everyday life without this event dictating their daily activities. You're not alone. Just remember that. You're not alone. And if you do need help, do not hesitate to reach out. Reach out to friends, reach out to family, and reach out professionally if you need it. Remember that help is a simple phone call away. Just dial 988 and tell them how you're feeling, and they'll connect you to somebody who can really help. It's easy these days. There's no stigma, and it's a-okay to not be okay. So if that's all we uncover today, then it was a great day. And I really appreciate Joe and Rachel coming on to talk about what's not an easy topic. And I feel like Joe was so excited to talk about it because it's not talked about. It's not the first thing. Everybody's so excited about talk about what tires are you running? What pressure are you running? What's your gear ratio? Is your bike made out of carbon or aluminum? Or is it bamboo? What type of sealant are you using? Tubes or no tubes? All that minutia. And we don't talk about the post-race blues. So talk about the post-race blues. If your friend just finished a big event, be an active listener. Use your ears, not your mouth. Like, just get them talking. They want to talk about it. They want to share their experiences. They know that we didn't do it, but they want to talk about it. And I know this from experience because I like talking about events after I do them. I started a podcast so I can talk about my events. I did a whole episode on Core 4 and Gravel Worlds and Driftless and Serum and all of that. So yes, I like to talk about it, and that's a way for me to deal with it. And it's awesome, and I appreciate you guys for listening. Anyway, there is help. Please seek it out and support your friends who just came home. Well, that is all for this week. Again, thanks to Joe Stiller. baryak.com. If you need stuff for your bikepacking trip, look up baryak.com, and Joe, his wife Tina, will be happy to help you out. I love that about them. I think that's awesome that they're so willing to share their vast extent of knowledge. I'd like to have those two on to talk about their experiences. They probably have about 5 books in them. Each one of their trips could probably be a book. But anyway, thanks tons for coming on, Joe. Again, baryak.com. Rachel, thanks tons. It was a pleasure to have you on and share your expertise and help us along. And I want to thank you for listening. I really appreciate that you guys tune in each week to listen. This is episode 91. It's hard for me to believe, but we are coming up on episode 100. Who should we have on for episode 100? Got a little time to think about that. Should be in early November, but I'm super stoked. I am stoked to say that we've got Schwamigan coming up, the Mount 40th anniversary of that awesome mountain bike race. Emily Newsom is coming up, and I am working on scheduling John Borstelman, recent winner of the Gravel Worlds. So, some great weeks coming up. Looking forward to episode 100. If you want to support the show, I would love it if you would rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure and hit the subscribe button. All of that stuff really helps the podcast grow. And if you want to support the show financially, head on over to buymeacoffee.com and drop a few pennies in the coffee cup, if you will. I would love that. Just look for Bike Talk with Dave at buymeacoffee.com. And you can catch all the episodes on your computer or that little thing in your hand called a phone. It's hard to believe it's called a phone. That supercomputer in your hand at biketalk.bike. Or if you'd like to get your stuff on YouTube, every episode is now streaming on YouTube. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have a great week. And remember that nothing compares to the simple pleasure of riding a bicycle.